All right. So when people hear executive functioning, what do they usually misunderstand?
I think a common misperception about executive functioning is that it's one or two skills. And if you fix one or two things, it'll automatically resolve or cure itself. To really develop these skills, it requires deliberate practice and accountability and some feedback and time and space to discuss progress and make those adjustments. So I've heard it said that executive functions develop at a glacial rate, which can be disheartening for some parents or could be frustrating. But we know that that can be accelerated with deliberate practice and support.
So why do you believe these skills have to be taught, not assumed?
I think historically, kids naturally had a tendency to develop these skills. There were fewer or lower expectations on kids to manage input from multiple channels. Life was simpler. There wasn't social media, there wasn't the internet or digital space to organize and keep track of. Now, students are filtering information coming from exponentially more input sources, and they're having to figure out how to assimilate that data into actionable steps for them to be able to be successful. I think naturally kids were given more time to play historically in the past and solve some of these problems. Today's culture doesn't afford them that much opportunity to figure out how to create structure for themselves. There are those who will do it innately well and those who don't. And those who don't really benefit from having deliberate instruction and practice because once they figure it out and we show them how to do that, they're on par and can accelerate their learning and accomplishments.
If you had to sum it up, what actually changes for a student when executive functioning clicks?
I think that's the key to self direction. So, a lot of parents come to us and say, how can you motivate my child? I'm constantly have to ride my child. I keep having to prompt him or her to do something. I really think intrinsic motivation is the ultimate end result of a good executive functioning skill. Most people in their lives want to do well. They just don't do well because they don't know how. With some good instruction and helping them become aware of some small steps they can take, they're apt to take another step and then another step and another step, and it becomes gradually more sophisticated. Kids become motivated the more successful they are, and then they really see what's possible with doing a few simple things well. So I think ultimately self direction and self determination are the outcomes of good instruction.
So is that why you made this designed as a practice-based system, not just a curriculum?
Yes, I think that's critical because there's a lot of understanding or belief out there that if we give a kid a strategy, they will independently pick it up. That's like me saying, well, all I have to do to hit a good forehand is to position my feet correctly. The truth of the matter is, that's one part of hitting a good forehand in tennis, right? Or pickleball. I have to practice it over and over again. I have to respond to the shot that I'm given. I have to adjust to the player in front of me. And the more experiences I have putting that into practice, the more adept I'm going to be to use it when things become ultimately challenging or my competitor gets more sophisticated.
Yep.
Same practice applies to students, right? The more they practice it, the more adept they're going to become at it. There's no substitute for that. No strategy is going to be a shortcut, right? For deliberate competencies that we have to deliberately build.
So is that why you start with the brain, the amygdala, prefrontal cortex instead of behavior?
Yeah, behavior is a symptom of a core issue, right? So you can treat a behavior, but that doesn't mean you resolve the function of the behavior, which is more than likely a skill deficit, right? So sometimes when you teach a skill, you can automatically mitigate the behavior. So we start with building awareness of themselves. Everybody likes to learn about themselves. Most people are curious. Well, why is this happening? Or what's going on in my brain? So we think that in a safe environment, awareness layered on top of a safe environment is the beginning of learning. If we take the time to teach kids about their own brain and what's actually happening in their response times or why they feel a certain way, they're going to become equipped to be able to control or self direct that. So we always say, on top of safety in a safe environment, awareness is the beginning of learning.
You talk a lot about loud, quiet, and just right emotions. Why does that language matter for kids?
I think it's easy for kids to hear judgment language when they feel a certain way. If they have a big emotion or a loud emotion, maybe they're judged for being overreactive or not caring on the other end of the continuum, not caring enough or being underreactive or not complacent really about their grades. The truth of the matter is that they have these feelings. Sometimes they're big feelings. Let's give them a label. It's okay to have big feelings, but then we can then equip a student to make a choice on what to do after they understand they have a big feeling and have some options about how they want to respond.
What does zoomed in versus zoomed out attention actually look like in a classroom?
Yeah, zoomed out attention, I think, is often identified as the daydreamer student, right? Who's staring out into space, may not be attending unless you pass by them and give them a little nudge to help them refocus. Zoomed in attention might be what we call hyper focusing or dialing in. So, if we can help students understand attention can be a continuum, some days we feel really dialed in. We are zoomed in, we are focused, we are engaged, maybe like we are on a very preferred activity, right? But zoomed out would be maybe we're attending to multiple inputs, or our brain may have just taken a walk and maybe thinking about something creative. Helping them become aware of what their brain is doing is what we call metacognition, thinking about your thinking. And some people also like to call it mindfulness, is being aware of what your mind is doing at any given time. In grit and growth mindset, we use this language about zooming in and zooming out because it's on par with the age that this curriculum is targeted to.
So, one of the big goals, challenges that you attack to achieve is why is task completion such a breaking point for so many students?
Yes, we don't really get measured how we do in the middle of a task. We get measured as to whether or not we finish a task, right? When students are distractible, right, or they might have their attention take a little walk and go in a different direction, helping them remember that completing a task is as important as beginning or the middle of it. We like to help students become aware of how to hold themselves accountable for task completion using some visual supports and what we call external accountability, which is that checkpoint or that check off or crossing off a task, gives them the dopamine hit, makes them feel good about their activities and their work completion. So that's an important part of them holding themselves accountable versus what we call third party accountability, which is an adult or another person.
Put you on a spot a little bit here. What's one small strategy that often creates an immediate win for students?
I think having them complete a self evaluation, right? We often assume kids can see themselves or they take the time to look inward or look at themselves from a different perspective or someone else's perspective. Many times when we meet with students, regardless if they're third or fourth grade or they're in high school, nobody's ever taken the time to ask the kid, how do you think you're doing on these given areas? What I find is refreshing is that when you give a kid the liberty to answer honestly about what they think, they sometimes know that there's a difficulty there. The nice thing is, if we do it in an emotionally neutral way, it opens the door to conversation so that we can say, well, what are some ways we might want to get better at this? So that would be a really good strategy, I think, that begins to engage the student in becoming more self aware and engaged in the solution process.
Okay. Can you explain a bit about the stop strategy in a way parents instantly get?
Yeah, so stop is a huge piece about helping build awareness that we can deliberately take an action after we think about it, right? So kids always understand the stop sign. They've seen that for years from crossing the street safety. They see their parents hopefully exhibit that, right? Feeling something or getting input is step one. Considering that input would be step two, but then choosing a response would be step three. A lot of times, step two is missed, but the stop strategy helps them stop and think about it so that they can make choices on step three on their action. And that's a very empowering place to be for kids.
So these skills change the tone of the parent student conversations at home. Is that the goal?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to be a parent. It's hard to be a parent of a student who's neurodiverse. There's no question about it. Those kids are learning or have to deliberately practice more skills than you might observe in other students, right? That can be tiring for parents. Great and growth mindset gives them language and tools to understand that these self regulation skills, the flexible thinking, the metacognition, the impulse control, these all are skills that kids can develop just like reading or writing or communicating or running and all the other things they want to play, right? So knowing that how we craft or curate an environment to talk about the development of social emotional skills, just like we do some of these other skills or athletics, helps neutralize the emotional reactivity that can often surround them.
So, what do teachers notice first when students start using this language?
Well, the great thing about it is that we actually define the language and they can actually understand that it's a thing, right? It's a thing to adults because we're aware of it or we may have accumulated this over time. But the first thing they do is actually notice it in themselves and in their peers. Once they've had the instruction, teachers can use the caught being good concept. Oh, I really saw how Jimmy put his friend first, or, showed flexibility when he didn't get his way in that group project, right? How did the rest of you notice some of these other skills in your friends this week, right? It starts to become integrated into the common language, and what we focus on grows. So, this curriculum gives educators, counselors, and students the ability to focus on the skill development. It's not dependent upon teachers doing all of it over and over again for them.
Seems to be a nice shift. How do you define grit for students without turning it into just try harder?
Just try harder is one of the most frustrating pieces that you hear. If you would just try or just lean in a little bit more. What research is starting to show and is that when an individual does a difficult thing, there's a part of their brain that grows and enables them to do one more difficult thing and one more difficult thing. If we start to normalize doing difficult things with communicating that setbacks or failures in the course of doing so is normal and rewarding, then we're going to have a whole lot more effort being put forward instead of kids that are afraid to try because they're afraid to fail.
Does that lead into that analysis paralysis or the task initiation?
Absolutely. They'll only do what they're told. They won't do the little extra part. They are always going to be adult dependent. Are afraid to begin a task, just like you mentioned on task initiation. Where should I begin? And often we say, well, what do you think you should do? Or why don't you try one thing and see if it works? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Giving kids the freedom to experiment with their own self direction and choices will lead them through a pathway of cultivating perseverance, problem solving, and ultimately self determination. When we take that away from them or we're overly critical, we're hampering that development in their brain and it makes them not want to take a chance on themselves. That's certainly going to hinder their development.
So, what does it mean to flip a fixed thought in real life?
Oh, yeah. You hear that a lot. Flip a fixed thought. You think, well, I'm just not good at that. And a lot of people would say, well, you're not good at it yet. That's one way to look at it. Another way to flip a thought would just be to rephrase it. This is hard for me, but I'm learning to do hard things. Anybody ever pick up a hobby just like an adult? See, the beauty of being an adult is we often have the luxury of doing things that naturally come easily to us. Kids, their job is learning. Every moment of every day, they go to school 5 days a week sometimes, and they have to learn something new. That's hard. Learning new things is difficult, inherently difficult. Helping them adopt the fact that they can do hard things means there's no limit to where they can go.
Seems like they're constantly. I'm studying now about the 10,000 hour effect to become proficient, and it seems like they're constantly giving these challenges. Each one might be a 10,000 hour commitment. So that's good to
Well,
do.
that's uh, well, that's also why adolescence takes until, sometimes they're 25. They say the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until young adults are 25 years old. Maybe that's the 10,000-hour effect across the 12 domains of executive function skills. You know, I think it does help adults contextualize that this is a developmental process and that with each exercise or deliberate practice thereof, they're putting in that development towards independence.
So is that why, rather than the end result that we're always chasing, why failure is actually a requirement for growth?
It's 100% a requirement for growth. We're only going to get better if we put the reps in, and inevitably, some of them aren't going to succeed. But the sheer ability to get up and keep trying is going to be what moves the needle forward, right? We have to think about it. Grit, determination, putting in good reps, where we say you're either building a good habit or a bad habit, but there's no neutral. Well, I'll just, try it this one, just I'll take this shortcut. That's building a bad habit, right? Helping young adults and kids particularly be intentional about building good habits takes less and less pressure off the adult as the child grows and matriculates.
What changes do schools notice when this is implemented with fidelity?
Wow. Um, Kids are willing to try harder at homework that's really tough for them. Kids are willing to adapt and adjust from social setbacks or frustrations, be a little bit more able to make amends with peers and forgive themselves because they can say, well, I'm growing in that. I was a little bit, you know, impulsive, or I said something I probably didn't mean. Still working on that. It gives us the freedom not to be perfect. Culturally, a school that adopts a growth mindset and is intentional about putting these types of social emotional instruction in front of builds kids to be better learners and students, but it also actually makes them better employees and better humans and increases the trajectory of where these kids can go. So culturally, I think schools will notice that in the long term, the kids will come back, they'll be good supporters, they'll be successful, right? They'll be able to reflect positively on the experience that they had at the school. But there's a huge ripple effect, like putting a pebble in a pond, right? It impacts the teachers, it impacts the parents, and it impacts the students, not just on an academic platform, but experientially and for the long term.
So, who is this program especially powerful for right now?
Yeah, excellent. So, Grit and Growth Mindset is written for third through sixth grade students. It can be deployed in the classroom by the classroom teacher or by a school counselor that pushes in. It can be used in a small group setting, which is great if you have a lunch bunch or group of kids that need some refining of these skills, or it can be done one on one. So there's a lot of flexibility with this curriculum. There are 3 different literacy levels that can be used just based on the learning community with whom you're dealing, right? Always giving each learner the opportunity to express themselves in a way that is not cumbersome, but is relevant to the content. So it's really important that kids can interface with it at their own literacy level. But we've also seen grit and growth mindset used for auxiliary programs, summer programming. We at Effective Students offer it as well through summer programming. And we're talking about their brains and their bodies all working together. And embedded in that is their emotions and self control. So I think there's a broad range of uses for this content for any school population, but that elementary piece is so huge, especially as they prepare for the difficulties in middle school.
What are you most excited about in the upcoming workshops and executive functioning webinars?
Yeah. So, what I love about this is that um, in the workshops, students can come in and just get the teaching part of the content for effective students, right? The effective student method on how you attack academics. Some kids we teach that to in the workshops and they're off and running, right? Which is great. They don't need to come back for coaching, but if they do, they can do a check in. Maybe 25% of the kids might need 4 to 6 coaching events, and then they will be underway and understand how to apply that in their environment. But yet, other kids, we find they're going to need some coaching, but it can accelerate how quickly we can get to application. So, there's a lot of exciting things about doing a workshop. One of the most beautiful things, I think, though, is for the younger kids to see that they're not alone. A lot of kids worry if they have ADHD or they're struggling with a learning difference or they're frustrated because their executive function skills aren't quite next the same as their neighbor. When they sit in a workshop, they're realizing this is normal to learn these things. I'm not alone. So it's a big reassurance to kids. It's a level set. And actually, to see kids older than themselves also growing in these areas is a big encouragement to them.
Makes sense. Speaking of implementation, if someone is interested either at a teacher level or educator or superintendent, or what's the pathway? What's the best recommended way to either test this out in a classroom or to bring it all into the school?
Yeah, wonderful question. Set up a call with us. Just have a call. We can show you the content. We can send you some samples. We can help you understand better what's going on, who you're trying to target. We can help you pilot this in your environment and have a few people trained for the train the trainer approach. So there's a couple different ways for you to deploy it in your own environment. Just set up a call with effective students and we can learn more about your present situation and recommend a pathway that suits your pacing and your community.
And the best way to get started is the website, which is
www.effectivestudents.com. We have a specific tab for educators where you can learn more about the effective student curriculum and our grit and growth mindset curriculum. Set up a call with one of our team members and we'll learn a little bit more about what you're trying to accomplish and see if we can help you this coming year.
great. And currently you're in multiple locations. What locations are you? Is Grit and Growth available in all the locations?
Yes, actually, it is. Grit and Growth is being used in a number of schools in Atlanta. We also have offices in Charlotte, Louisville, Portland. But I'll tell you, some of the schools that are implementing our curriculum are in Virginia, in Florida, and St. Petersburg. So it's really, we can support you and your learners nationwide and even internationally. And we're happy to do so. Give us a call. Let us know where you are, who you're serving, and we're happy to help.
Great. Well, thanks for your time. This has been informative, and we look forward to next time.